Well, in this episode, we get into the age-old debate of Apple versus Android.
And why I'm moving back to Morse code and ham radios.
Don't forget tinfoil hats.
Oh, I got you covered. All right, let's go.
I think we're good. He's weird.
The worst part is the next time Erica needs to cover something with wool, she's going to be like, what happened to all our tinfoil?
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Random Convos Over Coffee podcast. I'm Sean Burkowski.
And I'm Philip McCullough. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. So today we're getting into all things Android versus Apple.
The age-old debate. Which one is better, which one is worse, and which one do you prefer?
Exactly. So we're going to get into a bunch of different topics today. We're going to talk about some mobile devices, the ecosystem, preferences that we like, services that we like, don't like. We're just going to break it down, get into it.
Yeah. And at the end, you'll find out which devices we particularly use and why we've made those choices.
Exactly. For full disclosure, Phil and I we have mixed households, and meaning that we both use a multitude of devices. So I use, I'm an Apple guy. I've been an Apple guy since, as far as I can remember. And, but I actually use a Samsung phone. Go figure. Phil, on the other hand, he uses a lot of PC and Windows devices, but is an Apple guy.
Yeah.
So we kind of go back and forth in our debates and our discussions about which one's better, what we like, what we don't like, and we figure this will make some interesting content, might provide some value to our viewers and listeners, and so that's why we decided to go ahead and get into this today.
So I've got a question for you, Sean. Did you always start out with Android, or did you start off with the iPhone first?
That's a good question. So I've actually never owned an iPhone, even though I've been an Apple addict for my entire life. I started out, on an LC3 computer running Aldus Freehand and Macromedia Dreamweaver and, black and white monitor and learning the Macintosh from a very young age, and progressed to a beige G3 onto the iMac that I'm using now with the M1 chip. And so I've gone through several generations of Mac computers. It's what I use on my daily grind. I'm a creative professional, so I use the Adobe Creative Suite, and I've used those mechanics and software, Quark Express, and different software platforms all through the years that have run on a Macintosh. But I've never owned an Apple phone, and it's kind of interesting that you say that, but that is true.
So what made you pick the Android then when you went to the phone?
Kind of an interesting story. So it's years ago when I was been using a Macintosh computer, and then the iPhone came out. I was using a Motorola Razr, so I was a late adapter to the smartphone revolution. But when back in 2007 is when the iPhone launched, right? Mm-hmm. So the operating system, the Apple iOS launched in 2007 with the first iPhone that came out. Android came out later that same year with their Android operating system, and the first phone that was released was the HTC Dream, which I think in the US, what did they call it?
It was the T-Mobile G1. It was launched on T-Mobile's network when it came out in 2008.
That's right. So basically around the same time period, Apple came out with the iPhone, and then Android released their devices. And so they kind of, it took a little bit for them to kind of work out the bugs, and I wasn't an early adapter, so I waited a little bit. But the reason I went to an Android phone is kind of an interesting story. So we were, when my kids were younger, we would go on road trips. And several years later, Apple released the iPad, which we had an iPad. So we would go on trips with the kids. We'd go on long trips to Ocean City, and so we'd be in the car for 2-3 hours at a time. So we wouldn't want to watch movies. So if you had movies back in the day, you had two choices. You either buy the movie again from Apple and download it on your device, or you figure out a way to rip the movie from your DVDs and get a video file onto your iPad. through iTunes, which was a whole process. It was a nightmare. You'd go through software, you'd put your DVDs in, you had to rip the file. It had to be in a format that Apple actually liked to let you put it on their device. And the iOS was so restrictive about what specific file format you could use that it was just a nightmare. It was a headache, and it was a whole process. So that kind of, had me feeling like Apple was very restrictive at the time in the early days of the operating system. And I didn't like that. I wanted to be able to put an MP3 on there and not have to worry about if it matched their codec or their specific, the way they wanted it. I just wanted to put it on there and go. And I felt like you couldn't really do that with Apple. But with an Android device, we also had some Android tablets, and you could do that. You could just put an MP4 on there. You're good to go. Put an MP3 file on there. They weren't specific about, the codecs. They were very loose, less restrictive, more open, and more customizable for what you could do. And I like that aspect of Android. And so early in the days when it came to deciding which smartphone I was going to buy, I decided I wanted to go with the one that was less restrictive. And so I went with an Android and just, kind of been stuck in that ecosystem ever since.
So full disclosure, after my Windows Mobile smartphones, I've gone through several, all made by HTC back in the day, most of them with a slide-out keyboard because I did a variety of work myself. I actually was an early Android user and had stayed with Android for several years until a friend of mine sent me an iPhone when my Nexus, my Google Nexus, the battery died, and it was made by LG at the time. And I loved the phone, thought it was a great phone, loved having the stock Android operating system, certainly one of my favorites at the time. And he pretty much got me onto the iOS ecosystem. Like you, because of some of the consulting work I did, I had an iPad, I worked on iOS, and I did a lot of consulting on Android and iOS for other companies, setting up devices, things like that. But I was not an iPhone user specifically. So I had apps and stuff in both camps up until a few years ago when I've pretty much been staying on iOS devices simply because of the fact that I've been being fed iOS devices. Probably a conspiracy.
Right.
And I'm tied in because of my work now so much with the iOS operating system, it would be expensive to switch back. So.
Gotcha. Yep. Makes sense. Yeah, I was looking at some of the adoption of the Android versus Apple ecosystem or the operating system, and so according to some stats here I've pulled up, worldwide adoption, Android actually controls the market share over Apple from a worldwide standpoint. Android has about a 70% market share. I'm going to round up here. It's 69.71. I'm just going to round up these numbers, but Android has about a 70% market share versus Apple's 29.51 or 30% market share worldwide. I did a look at some of the top territories. Asia, no surprise, number one. Africa, number two, both of which dominated by the Android operating system, which just means that there's more devices out there in the world running Android than there is running iOS. No shocker there. You go to a 7-Eleven and they probably got 6 tablets behind the counter for $50 to $100 that running Android of all different degrees. And then you go to Best Buy and you can find better devices that are manufactured in different quality levels, but they run the gamut, right? There's all different manufacturers that make Android devices, from Samsung and you name it. There's all kinds of off-brand companies that manufacture tablets and devices that run the Android operating system. So no surprise that there's more devices worldwide than there are the Apple. But I did look. It says ironically, number 3 on that list of top territories is the United States. And the United States is a reverse. So it's like Apple has a 60% market share versus 40% of Android in the U.S. But outside of the U.S., Android has a dominant market share of the devices out there that are out there.
Yeah. So one of the differences in the operating systems when we talk about devices, Android is an open platform, which means anybody can download the code and customize how the Android operating system works. Samsung has their version of it. Amazon has their version of it, running on the Fire tablets for Amazon, and Samsung with the Galaxy line and stuff, running their version of it on tablets and phones and even computers and stuff.
I run the Galaxy.
Yep. So that's one of the reasons I think that Android has such a huge market share is because it's so adaptable to whatever device and stuff you have. Of course, iOS being an Apple product, being a product that they make money off of, it's certainly a product that they own the rights to, and they're very restrictive of the hardware that can run it, namely their own hardware. So you don't have the same types of things, but like you said, they have such an adoption here in the United States. Apple does with their devices. It becomes a love it or hate it company,
Right.
and Google and Android is certainly the same way, which is why it becomes the age old debate, as you said earlier. Between the two, and everybody has their favorites. So very interesting how they both actually came out about the same time. Certainly, different features that have taken off. I remember the first, what they called the window shade, which was your notifications, came out on the G1 Android phone, and people loved it. It was one of the things that raved about it. Of course, we all have pull down notifications now. I don't even think they call it the window shade anymore. It was becoming one of those terms that was, can we use that term? Can we not? And so each company has their own feature names that are similar to the
Right.
same features, but it's got to have its own name. It can't, copy and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
but it is an interesting back and forth that really has benefited the consumer in the long run.
It really
Because
has. It really has. You're
Features
right.
that we want are now available on either platform. It's not quite as restrictive as it used to be, but there are still some different things on each platform that make one stand out over the other, depending on what particular use you have the device for.
Yeah, and you touched on it, Phil, and that back and forth. Apple comes out with a feature and then Android copies. Android comes out with a feature that Apple copies, and they go back and forth. I mean, at this point, it's almost indistinguishable. If you look at the Android operating system versus the Apple operating system, they're so closely knit. I mean, it's almost indistinguishable, other than a few things here or there. But and then you get into the ecosystem discussion. That's a whole different thing. But just from a GUI standpoint, the user interface standpoint, they're very, very similar, and that's
Right.
just come from years of copying each other. I mean, there's been lawsuits back and forth, and they've conceded some and won others. And I remember when Apple sued, I don't know if it was Samsung or Google directly over the way that the icons looked, because they were using similar icons and people were getting confused, and they wanted to protect their IP, so they forced them to change the icons to be something different. But those are small differences, but it was all that back and forth in those litigations, and what you can do, I can do better. And that really benefited,
Right.
you're right, benefited the consumer, because at this point we have something that works well, and they've all learned, as the years have progressed, what works and what doesn't, and made the user interface and experience easier.
Yep, and Apple is, in comparison, a more locked down ecosystem for sure.
They are.
Most Apple users will find staying in the Apple ecosystem beneficial. All your stuff naturally syncs from one device to, if you're using their laptops, if you're using Apple TV or any of the other external accessories, they just work well together. If you like simplicity, you don't want to deep dive into stuff, you have a lot of advantage there. If you have a family and everybody's using the same platform, again, you have advantages on both sides with being able to set up family monitoring and stuff like that. And so there are different times where one certainly makes more sense over the other, depending on what you're doing. Obviously, on price, if price is a factor, you are going to have better opportunities at a lower cost to own going with the Android operating system, because you can find various devices that are manufactured at different price points versus I think Apple's starting price is $400 if I remember on the SE
right.
phone, and it goes up from there. So there are people who are going to say, hey, I don't need a $400 phone. I want, give me the $100 model, or let me pay it through my contract or whatever.
Right.
But definitely throughout the different ecosystems there, the benefit is that most of the apps are available on both platforms. There are going to be Apple-specific apps that obviously aren't going to be available on anything other than Apple. So if you're using those specific apps, you're going to be on Apple. And the same as some of the other ones. Samsung's going to have some apps that they've written that are just available on Samsung phones, and vice versa. But typically, your third-party apps are available for both. You still have features that are missing.
Right.
That don't get introduced on both platforms at the same time from time to time. But outside of that, it's becoming more and more comparable.
Seamless, yeah. And
Yeah.
and you mentioned some of the apps that are available for one and the other one, and Apple being more restrictive. You're right. In some degree, they are more restrictive. I've heard them often referred to as the walled garden, which it's beautiful on the inside, but they keep some of the riffraff out, and so they're very restrictive about what they let into their coding, and make sure that things are clean, and make sure that things work right, and that they're not using malicious software. And of course, things get through that they end up. To Apple's credit, they are very good about getting them out of the marketplace as soon as they find out that there's some nefarious things going on. But they're also very protective of their ecosystem and the apps that they let in. Apple's a little bit more open. To their benefit, Android is more
Google,
customized. Yeah, Google Android is more customizable. So you can do a lot more features. You can customize your operating system. You can customize the phone. You can do a lot more in that regard than you can with Apple. It's more for the advanced user, I believe, because you need to know what you're doing. Some of the apps that run on an Android don't run on an Apple. For example, if you ever run ROMs or emulators for some of the old games, you can't do that on an Apple, or at least you couldn't. A few years ago when we looked into it, I don't believe you still can, but
not without some heavy workarounds.
Right,
So
jailbreaking your phone, which is not recommended.
Jailbreaking or setting up a developer account, things like that. There are ways to do it, but that's beyond the scope of our discussion. And for the average user, now you're right. They're restricted.
And so other things like that on Android, they do give you more open access to do things like that, to run emulators and to download ROMs, and you have more access. You have more expansion of capabilities with an Android device, where you can use an SD card, and on most of their devices you can expand the memory. Where if an Apple, if you want 256 gigabytes or 512 or 1 terabyte, you've got to buy the more expensive phone because you want the memory. Where an Android device, you could just buy a cheap SD card, pop it in the side, expansion slot, boom, you're off to the races, and you save money, and you can always expand your memory. There are, like I said, with Android, you're also more open to some of those applications that you can sideload on and run without having to root hack your phone, because they give you more advanced features. And that was also one of the reasons I use an Android phone. But there are disadvantages to being more open and having an advanced. If you don't know what you're doing, you open yourself up to security risks. And Apple, to their credit, is a very secure platform. Is there any one platform that is the most secure, that will never have a virus running, will never be hacked? No.
Well, that would be great.
That would be great, but unfortunately that is not the case. And but to Apple's credit, they are one of the most secure, and some of the security features that they have, and privacy. The iOS has dedication, and Apple has a dedication to consumer privacy. Like the old adage, if you're not paying for the service and the service is free, you are the service. And Google has kind of taken that mindset with a lot of their services that they offer for free, but they're selling your data, and they're selling you ad space, and or ad space to companies through your device, and that's how they make their money. With Apple, you're paying a premium to keep the operating system clean, and to a lot of the services clean. But you're paying a premium for that privilege.
Yeah, and with the introduction of, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Nope, go for it.
With the introduction of the iOS 15 operating system, Apple has set a new standard where they are allowing you to disable apps from being able to see additional information that before they had access to. As a marketer, of course, that's probably a challenge for you of finding workarounds. But at the same time, it's again giving the consumer the option. Do I want these apps to be able to track? And maybe the apps become more limited if you turn those things off. But at the same time, you're actually a little more in control of what the device has access to based on your own information.
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's we've seen that with Facebook, and Facebook, they took full page ads out in big magazines to kind of blast Apple, and make them out to be the enemy of small businesses. Because basically, for those who aren't familiar, Facebook did tracking in order to supply you with ads, and they would track you through your phone and through your device. Apple gave the option with the new iOS update to opt out of that tracking, which has essentially affected Facebook's ad business, because they make money by selling businesses advertising that they can put in your news feed. And if they can't track you, they don't know what ads to send you specifically. So that's affected their ad business, and it's affected Facebook stock prices, as a matter of fact, as a result of that. As a marketer, you like to have that flexibility and capability to be able to reach consumers who are interested in certain things. But as a consumer, I value privacy, and I think I applaud Apple for what they did for giving people the option to opt out of tracking. So I see both sides of it. It's you play devil's advocate to see both sides of the sword, but it definitely makes sense. I understand what they were going for.
And I think any business knows that at any time when they're relying on another service or another option like that, should be always prepared and certainly aware to make changes when something else changes. Facebook has made changes to their platform that has shut out a lot of people before that use it to make money and things like that. So it's no different in the same sense that when a company they use, such as Apple's platform, does the same thing, they also have to be the same kind of resiliency to say, okay, what do we need to do to work with this in such a way that we can still reach the audience and reach the clientele they're trying to reach for their clients, obviously the people running ads and stuff. So,
and I don't want to get into a whole marketing debate, but and go down that rabbit hole. But I do want to say one thing is, I understand what Apple's doing by valuing people's privacy, and I applaud them for that. To Facebook's credit, or to kind of back them up a little bit on why it's hurting the business of small businesses. So say you run a coffee shop and you make custom beans. You want to reach people who drink coffee. So in Facebook, you could identify people that live in your area that drink coffee that might be interested in your product because of the tracking that happens, through the devices. And you're able to feed them advertisements. And I might see that ad and go, hey, that's awesome. They got, these custom beans they're in Maryland. I want to try it out. And I might go buy some from this small business and support small business and be a consumer. Without the tracking ability, they can't do that. They have no way to know where you are and what you're into, what your interests are. Some people see that as a an invasion of privacy, and I appreciate that. And so for those people there, but to Facebook's credit, it does affect small businesses who rely on Facebook ads to keep the lights on and to keep consumerism going and to keep their business going. And so I definitely see why Facebook was fighting hard to keep it. Obviously, you don't become a $1 trillion company by giving stuff away for free. So
right. Well, and it was a revenue part for them.
It was a revenue.
They were, as the businesses were making money from the benefits of running ads, people coming into their stores, Facebook was certainly making money off of the ads themselves. So
Exactly. But again, not to get off too far in the weeds. Speaking of revenue, I looked into some of the app stores because we talked about worldwide adoption, right? Android having this worldwide adoption of more devices that are out there, with Asia and Africa and just worldwide. There's more people. What was it? A 70-30 ratio, 70% of worldwide adoption versus Apple's 30% worldwide adoption. But what was interesting is as far as revenue, that's in-app purchases. So you go into the Google Play Store and you buy an app, or you go into the Apple Store and you buy an app. Apple in 2020 reported $72.3 billion in App Store purchases. Android reported $38.6 billion in the same time period, which is almost double. Just think about that. So Apple has a higher adoption rate here in the United States primarily, but they've made double the revenue in app purchases and in-app purchases during the same period of time. That's incredible.
and it makes me wonder too, is it, for lack of the pun, is it an apples to apples comparison? Is it, are the apps the same price? Are some of them available free with the option to pay later on Android versus Apple, things like that? Those are certainly questions to dig deeper into, but at the same time, probably most of the app purchases are being purchased here in the States. And again, I don't know that for a fact. I'm just guessing. And so when you look at the market share that Apple has in the United States for iOS devices versus Android, it would make sense that there would be a lot more app purchases happening on iOS devices.
Right. Let's get into the ecosystem. So let's talk a little bit about the Android versus the Apple ecosystem. And what do I mean by ecosystem? Apple and Android, they have their own specific devices. They have their own specific software that runs. for example, Google has their Gmail, they have their Drive, they have their Google Docs, they have all those software integrations that integrate with their hardware as well. On the Apple side, you have your iCloud device, you have your Apple Mail, you have your calendar, your maps, everything that works within the Apple ecosystem within their devices. And so there's a comparison between the two of things that we like and things that we don't like. Phil?
Yep. So fair enough. So typically, if it's an Apple-specific application, like the stuff that comes with their phones themselves, the Apple Mail, as you mentioned, things like that, they're only going to live on Apple devices. Whereas on the Android side, where you have Gmail, you have anything that's a Google application or service, you've got the Google Drive, you've got all those applications there. They're available on both platforms. The same as Microsoft and other applications like that. So when you're talking about usability, if you are in the Apple ecosystem, you use Apple Mail, you use Messages, you use any of the Apple-specific applications, GarageBand or whatever, you're only going to be able to use those on an Apple device. They're just not going to be available on the Android. So when it comes to comparison of the ecosystem, you have that side of it. If you're using those particular applications, if you're using reminders from Apple or notes from Apple, you're just not going to have an option for that on any other platform. Whereas if you're a Gmail user, if you're using Google Apps, if you're using Microsoft 365 or something like that, where you're using the different applications available, they live just about on any platform there is. So you have options, once again, depending on what you live in. As far as the comparison of those, it's putting aside Apple-specific applications, they pretty much operate very consistently the same. I have no problems running all of my Google applications on an iOS device, which, as we had discussed one time before in a previous conversation, you weren't even aware how well they would work, but they're pretty seamless. All the benefits that you get are the same benefits I get running on iOS. And so it's interesting. I'm not locked into too many Apple-specific applications. So switching platforms when I switched from Android to iOS was not that difficult, and vice versa, because I was able to find what I typically run. I'm a Microsoft 365 user for a lot of my applications, and I use Gmail for other stuff. So, and Google Drive and things. So that part of it was pretty much straightforward for me. And if I ever had to switch back one day, again, the same thing. I could pick up an Android device. I could just reload my, log into my accounts, download the apps I need on the Android device, and keep right on going without missing a beat.
Yeah, I've kind of live in the Google ecosystem as well, and it's because I use Gmail for my email. I use Google Drive to store my docs. I use Google Webmaster Tools to monitor the website traffic and manage the websites that I create, because I'm a creative professional. I need access to those things. I use YouTube for our videos. This is where we upload these podcasts to our YouTube channel. I like having the integrations with calendar. I love getting an email from a Southwest flight that automatically gets dumped into my calendar that alerts me 24 hours before the flight that, hey, you need to check in. Like, I love having that tight integration without having to do anything. And it just works seamlessly and effortlessly, and it just works. And everything's together. And I only have to have one login to remember. And I can switch between, these different devices. I love doing a Google search for a location that I'm interested in going to, hitting the directions, and it opens up in Maps on my phone. I can go plug in my phone in the car, and it remembers the location services that I searched on my computer on Google, because everything speaks together. I love having that tight-knit integration. And in the ecosystem, the Google ecosystem, because I use those services, even though I'm on an Apple device, I'm Google searching, using my Chrome browser, and so you can, everything talks, everything works, and it's just seamless, and I love it.
Yeah. And as long as on the, I have the same benefits even running on iOS, as long as you're signed in with your Google accounts and you have them set to synchronize across devices, I can open up Chrome on an iOS device, and hey, there's the tabs I had open on my laptop if I want. There's the tabs I had open up. For instance, I have a MacBook, I have Windows laptops, I run both systems. So depending on what computer I grab or what work I'm doing, if I'm at my desk, if I'm sitting on the couch with a laptop, same thing. Or if I just need to pull up my phone because I'm on the go and I don't have all that stuff with me,
Right.
I can still grab all that. Apple has gone a long way now in their ecosystem to allow you to pick and choose.
Yeah.
So I can now have things open up in Google Maps versus Apple Maps. So depending again on your preference, I've used Google Maps for so long that I just stick with it.
Yeah.
But depending
Apple
on your
Maps
preferences on there,
comically funny, comically bad.
and I've heard it's gotten better. They're using they're pulling data. Obviously, Apple themselves does not go out and do the GIS data and all that stuff. They buy it from another company.
Right.
Google actually does do a lot of their own stuff now with Street View and things like that. Yep. But they probably also get some of that data from other locations as well. And
they do.
And so it kind of depends partially on where you get your information from as to how good your services
are. Yeah, and that's Google has the advantage in two of those aspects. So like you said, like you mentioned with Maps, Google Maps is phenomenal because it integrates and they purchased Waze not too long ago, so they were able to integrate something like traffic stops and things like that into cameras. Where police locations into their software, but just from a location standpoint, Google was collecting data on locations for years to build that database, to build that structure, and same thing with search results. Google is way better than Siri when you're trying to do search results and look for things. I mean, you could debate that all day long, and you could go on YouTube but it's true. I mean, the Google search is superior to the Siri in a lot of ways because, again, Google's database is massive, and they're collecting data, and that's their business, and so they have a bigger resource to go from based on for that service, and it is what it is. You can't debate that.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree with that. I agree with that 100%. And it comes down to exactly what you said. Google's model initially was search, and how do we make search relevant, and how do we get rid of all the bloating and everything else, which ironically is a little bit funny now because it's pretty heavily ad based now when you're doing a Google search. Who actually scrolls down and hits page 2 anymore on a Google search. And so, of course, it has opened up the market for alternatives, which is outside the scope of what we're discussing. But they've, long story short, they've been at it so long. They've gathered so much data on it for so long. They've given away services for free for so long to trade off being able to get that data. How do we access user data? And then how do we make that relevant today? And so they have such a head start on that. It's not to say somebody can't overtake that. The same as somebody couldn't overtake Apple. It's always possible.
Yeah, and Apple's making leaps and bounds in some of their integrations with Apple Maps and their search results with Siri results. They've gotten better, but they're nowhere near the companies like Google, who that's what they do. That is their business model. But Apple's business is to make beautiful products that work well, and they do a good job of that. Now, can they be the best at everything? No. And so there are aspects of Google that are better than Apple. And vice versa. When you get into user interface and ease of user interface, I can hand my grandmother an iPhone and she can figure it out. But if I hand her an Android device, it might take a little bit of explaining because it's just a little bit of a different different process to do things in the settings and whatnot. But it all comes down to user preference, really, is what I'm trying to say.
Yep. So I'm going to throw one interesting question at you then.
Okay.
What do you think about the fan base? So you have your Android fans and your Apple fans, and clearly Apple fans, if you're an Apple fan, you're a diehard Apple fan.
I'm a diehard Apple fan.
There's no doubt about it, and I know you are. On the Android side, what I find interesting is you can have Android users that just hate Apple. So they don't want anything to do with Apple. But they're not really a diehard Android fan. They just hate Apple, and that's why they use it. But on the Apple side of the ecosystem, if they hate the Android, it's typically because they love Apple. And so do you find that the fan base on the Apple side is more diehard versus on the Android side, or not? I'm curious.
I come from an interesting perspective, right? So I remember when Apple was the little guy. They were, like I said this in a previous episode, that Apple was the David in the David and Goliath story against Microsoft. They were the small company who everybody dismissed and thought they were just going to go away, and they just wouldn't die. And they've built a rabid fan base about being making the best products, not concerned about the cost, but just making the best products, focusing on design, focusing on user experience, and they've built a rabid fan base, a diehard loyal fan base like myself because of that, because of the love of the consumer, the love of the user, the end user. And today, Apple's a $2 trillion company and a household name, and everybody knows them. And the iPhone is widely adopted. Matter of fact, people will shame you for not having an iPhone. If you walk in with an Android, or you try and text somebody in iMessage and it shows up with the green, oh, that guy's not using an Apple phone. It's weird to me because, I remember when Apple was the little guy who was fighting for their life and to build themselves up to where they are now. It's kind of likened to somebody who discovered a band and thought they were the best and wanted to tell all their friends about their favorite band that they discovered because nobody had heard of them. And then all of a sudden that band shows up on the radio and they go, oh, they sold out. They're not cool anymore. And that's what Android, I feel, has done, is like the Android fans are like, oh, they're not cool anymore. They're on the radio. They've sold out. That's what I feel is it's kind of become at this stage.
So does Apple even let you back in the clubhouse then? I mean, you're an Apple diehard, but you walk around with an Android phone, or do you have to put it in like an Apple iPhone sleeve so that people don't know it's running Android?
I mean, I don't really care. I'll be honest, I don't really care. And I may switch, actually, because, there are some aspects of the iPhone that I like. The security we mentioned, the privacy. There are also like accessories like the Apple Watch, which is pretty cool that it can take an EKG and tell you your blood oxygen level, and it integrates with your phone. And it'd be cool if your phone is sitting on your desk or in your pocket or in the car, and it pops up on my computer when somebody calls through, and I can take a video call or I can text message through the computer that I'm on 8 hours a day instead of having to go find my phone and figure out where the buttons are and try to push it with my fingers. And there are some cool advantages, and I may switch at some point. But I've owned an Android phone forever, and it would be difficult for me to switch. But I think I'm hey, I'm an Apple diehard. I love Apple. Don't get me wrong. I just call it a course of habit for using the Google phones. There are things too, like and this is debatable, but because Apple is restrictive to their own hardware. And Google's Android devices are a little bit more nimble. So they're made by multiple manufacturers, and those manufacturers are all competing for business, right? So that's also good for consumers. Mm-hmm. So there's multiple devices, Samsung, and I don't even know the name of the other ones, but there's a ton of them, right? There's a ton of companies out there and brands that are trying to fight to make devices. Samsung on Android devices for mobile, they seem to have kind of taken the lead as far as being revolutionary and having the coolest stuff and being top of the tech, making sure they have the really good cameras, really good antennas, really good screens, because they just make really good devices. Apple's only competing with themselves, so their priority is to make the devices better each iteration, but they're not competing with anybody else other than Android, obviously. But from their own operating system, they're only competing with themselves. Android companies that make Android devices are competing with other companies that make Android devices. So the consumer benefits from that, and they get tech fast. They get tech faster. So, an Android device, first one with 5G. First device to come out with 5G. They typically have better antennas. They typically have better hardware, or at least they come out with better hardware first. And then, down the road, Apple will say, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that too. Or integrate some of this tech as well. I mean, would it take a year or more for Apple to come out with a 5G phone? And Android had it, for a year and a half or so before Apple did. It's because they're quicker to adopt that new technology, and that's to the consumer's benefit. And that's also another advantage of being an Android user, of getting first adoption for some of this tech. I
mean, Apple releases new devices on a very specific time scale too, so they don't put out a new device twice or three times a year, whereas manufacturers can do that anytime they want with an Android device. Hey, I want to put new hardware in. I want to put this release and I'll put that release in. Hey, 3 months ago we just released a phone. Well, we're putting another one out. This one has this option, that option.
It's got 3 lenses instead of 2.
Right. So of course there's advantages, like you said, where you might be first to market on some of these technologies, and there's some disadvantages too. When Google pushes an update to or at least the Android team, I should say, when they push an update to the Android operating system, typically the ones that get it first are actually the ones running stock Android. If it's a Samsung device or Amazon or anybody else, if they want to incorporate those features, they have to adapt that update to work on their devices.
Right.
And so the more third-party devices you have that are running these operating systems, some might never see these updates. Some might get to a point where they can't even run the latest version of Android. And of course that happens on Apple's side too, but it's a much longer lifespan process, it seems.
Yeah, you should preface that. So what happens is, I'm running a Samsung Galaxy phone, and it's running Android as its core operating system, but Samsung does their own interface on top of it. So it's themed, Samsung themed version of Android's operating system, and that is the same for other devices that are out there. Different companies that manufacture. You mentioned what is it? The Amazon Fire, right? So the Amazon Fire runs its Amazon Fire version of Android, and Samsung runs its Samsung version of Android, and there's a ton of different devices that are out there that run a themed version of Android. Then there are Android devices like the Pixel phone and different devices that run a stock version of Android, which is just the basic
Motorola
version.
had some where they would launch a device with a stock version of Android, and they would have a similar device that had their version of Android.
And the point is that adds complexity for pushing updates. So when Android has a security patch or an update or a new feature, they have to push it out to the Android device, the stock Android device. Then they have to push it out to all of the other manufacturers. Have to integrate those changes and those updates and push it to their devices. So Samsung has to get the changes, make sure they mesh with their devices. And what is it, a week, a month, it could be, 6 months, whatever, before they can push the update to the Samsung devices for those security patches and new features.
Right. And back when I had my Nexus, which would have been the early version of the Google Pixel now, as soon as a security patch came out, and that's the same side of it. I loved it for that reason. When they would find a flaw in the Android operating system, they would push a security patch out to fix it. I got those right away. I didn't have to wait for
running the
anything
stock
to be
version of Android.
Running the stock. I didn't have to wait for it to be customized because of those issues. So
and Apple doesn't have that issue, because when Apple pushes an update, it's to every device that they have. They do not have to worry about the Samsung version of Apple's iOS, because there is no Samsung version of Apple's iOS.
Right.
So it's just a simpler simplification of the update process across all their devices, and they typically last longer lifespan because they can receive those updates longer rather than becoming outdated faster. Like some of the Android devices become outdated faster because they can't keep up with the operating system changes. Where Apple devices typically have a longer lifespan.
Yep, and that's a manufacturer thing there. Apple manufactures their device and the operating system. They're in full control. The Android team does the operating system, but you have Samsung, you have all these third-party companies that make the devices, and it's on them to actually adopt the updates to work on their devices. Totally different model, for sure.
Yep, for sure.
So
Phil, I wanted to get into one last thing is, we talked about Apple Music and YouTube Music, and how there's a difference between the two. That's just another aspect of the Android versus, or just Google in general versus Apple debate. Is you use YouTube Music, right?
I do, actually. I've been a subscriber back when it was Google Play Music. I was actually one of the early adopters to the service, so I got in on an entry-level rate, which I've carried through to this day. The thing I still like about it, I didn't like the switch to YouTube Music as much. I did like the Google Play Music. I felt the way the interface was for how I listen to music was better for me. But with the switch over to YouTube Music, I do get ad-free YouTube as part of that service, and I love that.
That's cool. So you can watch YouTube videos, and when you're watching your cat videos, you don't have to sit through the 30-second ads.
Yes, or as my kids laugh when I watch those car crash videos, and look at ways to, be able to avoid accidents.
Your toy unboxing videos, and you don't have to sit through 2 minutes of ads. That's cool. On top of that, you get to listen to ad-free music as well.
Yes,
so that's really cool. And one of the advantages of the YouTube Music, if you're a paid subscriber, is you can turn off your screen and let your screen go back and black and play it in the background. You can't do that. If I use the free version, full disclosure, of the YouTube Music, because you can listen to any artist and any album you want for free. And you can do that because you're going to deal with the 30-second ads that are going to play before each song or every couple songs. But you also have to keep your screen on at all times. And so you can't turn it off. And so as a paid subscriber, those are two added benefits. One of the other things, if we're comparing like YouTube Music to the Apple service, I don't know how they compare as far as price wise, because it gets convoluted when you talk about like family plans and bundled packages. So it's hard to really compare apples to apples there. But the Apple Music playback is higher quality. So the YouTube Music, is a compressed audio format. It's 256 kilobits per second. It's a 256K compressed audio. Versus the Apple Music, which I believe is actually better than CD quality. If it's like 24-bit, 48 kilohertz, or there's even a higher version of that, I think you have to have a special dongle for your device in order to receive the audio quality. Who's actually doing that? But the point is it's a beyond CD quality, just streaming it over your device. So for audiophiles, audiophiles being people who are really into music, who listen to every instrument and every sound, who want to hear that intended sound like the artist who recorded it, they probably gravitate more towards the Apple Music versus the compressed audio of the YouTube Music.
Yeah, I would think so. And as far as pricing goes, they're pretty similar. One of the notable differences on that realm, outside of if you buy an Apple device, a lot of times they'll give you a free 3-month trial of the service.
Get you hooked on the crack.
Right. But typically there's no free version of Apple's services. You don't get a free version of the Apple TV or any of their other platform services. Where a lot of times on the Android side, there is some sort of freemium model. I have some sort of base free version of it that I can use the service. One of the other advantages to being a subscriber to the YouTube Music, I can download music offline. When I'm at my kid's school, the service is bad, and if I'm waiting for them and I want to play some music, it's on my phone already. I can just play it off the phone. It works great. Apple has similar things with their service, but again, it's fully a paid model. You buy a device, you might get that limited time, but if you want to keep it, you're going to pay for it. So those are primarily some of the bigger differences. I think as far as pricing, and even in the family plans, you get similar models, and I would imagine just because of competition. You get to a point where they're relatively neck and neck. I know there's some services out there which goes beyond the scope of our Apple versus Android. There are some services out there with higher qualities and various features and stuff, and of course, some of them have an even bigger user base than either than Google or Apple in the realm of music. But once again, in this particular comparison, they're getting pretty close. Just you've got, like you said, your tiers of audio quality is probably the biggest one. YouTube, another thing with YouTube Music, if you're a big video watcher, one of the features YouTube Music has now that I don't see is available in Apple Music is you can switch from the song you're listening to the video of the song you're listening to at the push of a button, or a tap on the screen, I guess, really. But at a switch over, you can be in the middle and say, oh, there's a video available, I want to watch the video of it, or maybe it's concert footage or whatever, and you literally can just slide a setting, and now you're still in the middle of the song listening to it, but now you're also watching the live video of it, which is a neat feature for people who enjoy that.
Now, this is just a rumor, but I did hear that YouTube, I think by March of this year, I think they're going to be experimenting with a version of the YouTube Music where you will no longer have access to the free version, where you'll no longer have access to the music videos, but you will be able to turn off the screen. You'll have to listen to the ads because it's still ad supported, and they're taking away the feature of being able to watch the music video, which who cares? Usually I'm listening to it while I'm driving anyway, and I'm not paying attention.
I'm glad to know that. I'm glad you're not watching the videos while you're driving down the road, right? Unless you're driving a Tesla, maybe.
Right, exactly. But you can turn off the screen, and that is something that they're going to integrate to compete with some of the off-the-hand apps that are out there right now. And then I also heard that Apple's toying with the idea of doing a free version and ad-based version as well of their service. I don't know how true those things are. These are just rumor mills that you hear. But you could see that they're both trying to compete with each other for that free model as well, like you mentioned, and just stripping out some features, but the trade-offs there with paid advertising, just have to deal with some of that stuff. But interesting. Well,
Yep.
I guess
I think the long story short, when it comes to mobile platforms, which is basically what we're talking about, after all the years of all the different options out there, it's really come down to you're either iOS or you're Android at this point. I always found it was interesting to see even the newest Microsoft devices that are on the mobile platform no longer
Right.
run a Microsoft version; they're running a version of Android. So it's finally come down to two choices: Android or Apple.
I did a look at the market adoption, so both in the U.S. and worldwide, and laughably, the Windows Nokia operating system, they're just less than 1%. Matter of fact, the Windows is 0.01% in the United States of mobile operating system market share. It's not even 0.5%, folks. It's not even 0.25%. Matter of fact, just completely worthless. So yeah, you're right. It does. It comes down to Android versus Apple, and 60-40 split is they're not too far off from one another. And as we've discussed in this episode, as we're wrapping this up, they're very similar. So at certain levels, they're almost indistinguishable. They have the same features and the same benefits. Matter of fact, when Apple released the widgets, that was like that first that key that really turned it, where you could put the Google search bar on the home screen, and you could put the clock and do the things like you could do, which was also Android being very customizable was one of the things I loved, is the fact that you could customize. And once you get the clock in a certain way and the search bar in a certain way and your apps, and folders the way that you like it, you don't want to change that. And so when switching between the devices, and you couldn't do some of the things you could do on an Android on Apple, and now Apple with the release of widgets allows you to do some of those customizations. It just blurs the line, and it makes them, if you held two devices side by side, you'd almost be indistinguishable other than a few things here and there.
Yeah. But you're right. There's definitely a customization that I do miss that Android allowed that I don't have with iOS for sure.
Right. So. But I mean, coming down, if we had to pick a winner here, Phil, and we're debating who's the best of them all. Honestly, I can't do it because they have unique features one to the other. It comes down to personal preference, really. And I know it's kind of a bit of a cop out, and people don't want to hear that. They want the winner. That's what they're listening through this episode for. Well,
here's the winner. You want to know who the winner is?
Who's the
consumer.
Winner?
The consumer is the winner in this case because you have choices and options now that are going to suit your needs. And that's really what it comes down to. You have selection and price. You've got a range now. It's if you want a good phone but don't want to spend $1,500 on one, you still have some really good options out there to get a good phone, a good device. Plenty of options on apps if you're a gamer and mobile gaming and things like that. There's just so many good usable options today that I really think the consumer comes out to be the winner in this battle.
I like it. There you go. You heard it. The consumer is the winner. Apple versus Android. Who wins? The consumer. I like it. It makes sense. And I agree. It's, having the debate and having the battle between the two, and like so many years of just back and forth has really benefited us to the end point of, there are little things like I will tell you little annoyances. So like I have an Android phone, and when people would take Apple photos and they try to send them through a text message to an Android phone, it's not good because it's all blurry, it's jagged, it doesn't work because it doesn't understand Apple's file format. So there are definitely some advantages, disadvantages to both. Having FaceTime so that my wife can FaceTime with my daughter, and then she's at the store and say, hey, I'm trying to pick this up. Which one of these do you want? She can point the camera at and they can do that without having to download a third-party app. Is lovely. With an Android, I got to get on Instagram and do an Instagram, call to my daughter who's got Instagram, and we could both DM through. But you got to go through all these hoops. You got to go through third-party stuff to make things work the way you want. And Apple with the AirDrop. If you have a phone and I have a phone and you took a picture and I wanted it, you could just AirDrop it to me. With the Google, it's like, hey, can you put it on your Google Drive and make it publicly shareable and copy and paste the link into a text message and send it to me, and then I could get it. And you got to go through hoops and different things and to make it work. So there are clearly advantages and disadvantages, features and benefits of both.
And that's true. When you're talking about who wins when one friend is on one platform and one is on the other, probably neither.
Right. That's true.
Because you do have that, you still have that particular aspect of shareability. And obviously services like Dropbox and stuff have tried to simplify that process a lot more than it has been. But it really comes down to who would have ever thought that you being an Apple person and me being everything else, I'd be running iOS and you'd be running Android. That's really what it comes down to, because, it's just not what either one of us probably would have expected at the end of the day. So
Apple, it's your fault. If you'd have just made the open file format back when I had the iPad, none of this would have happened. I'd have been on an iPhone this whole time. I'm just kidding. Who knows, right?
Right.
No, you're right. It is funny. It is funny. And I'm an Apple diehard with an Android phone, and you're a Windows user who's running an iPhone. So who would have thunk it?
Yep. There you got it.
All right, guys. I guess we'll wrap this one up. We hope again this provided you some value. As always, that's our goal, is to give you information and provide value to you as a listener.
And as always, let us know your thoughts. What platform do you like? Why do you like it? Why do you hate it? Why do you hate the other platform, if you do or if you don't? And why you picked what you did. It's always interesting to us to find out how other people think about these topics and what their part of the conversation is. So
that's right.
Let us know in the comments.
So if you're listening to this on the audio-only format, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of the other audio-only formats, be sure to check us out on our YouTube channel, because what we do is we provide visuals. So if we're talking about something, and we'll put a picture up there or a video, and we'll try to explain what we're doing, where you can only do that through a video format. So if you go on YouTube and just do a search for Random Convos Over Coffee podcast, you're going to find us. And there's visual versions of all of these episodes. As a matter of fact, Phil, I don't think I told you this, but we've also have it's Joe Rogan and the Random Convos Over Coffee podcast have video on Spotify. So whether you love the guy or hate the guy, hey, we're right there with them. Yeah. We're one of the few podcasts on Spotify who also have video. So now you can listen to the audio version and watch it on Spotify.
Very good.
For better or worse. Unless you're Joni Mitchell or Neil Young. In that case, I'm sorry. But
all right. Well, we appreciate so much for you guys sticking out the episode and joining us today. And we hope that, as Shaun said earlier, that you found some value in the content, or at least certainly the random conversation we had today. And hopefully you enjoyed the coffee as well.
Indeed. Well, cheers, guys. Until next week.
Until next week. See ya.
See you.